17 years ago, a Scottish woman was found dead in the water off Heraklion in Crete. The Greek authorities ruled it an accident. Her family never believed that. And today, after 17 years of fighting, grieving, and refusing to give up, a court has finally agreed with them. Jean Hanlon was murdered, and the man who killed her has been found guilty. Here is the full story. Jean Hanlon was 53 years old, a Scottish woman from Dumfries who had made her life in Crete. She had been living in Kato Gouvis, a small village approximately 12 miles from Heraklion, for a number of years at the time of her death. She worked in several local bars and tavernas in the area. She was a mother of 3 sons, Robert, Michael, and a third who would all travel from Dumfries to Crete 17 years later to sit in a courtroom and finally hear their mother's story told. Jean Hanlon was last seen with a man at the Marina Cafe in Heraklion. She was reported missing shortly afterwards. On March 13, 2009, 4 days after she was reported missing, her body was discovered in the water off Heraklion. Greek authorities investigated and reached a conclusion that would define the next 17 years of her family's lives. They ruled her death accidental. Jean Hanlon's family did not accept that conclusion. They never accepted it. They pushed. They demanded reinvestigation. And a subsequent report vindicated their instincts. That report found that Jean had suffered injuries consistent with a struggle, injuries that were not consistent with an accidental death. Her family kept pushing. In 2023, 14 years after Jean's death, her family took matters into their own hands. They hired a private investigator. That investigator compiled a detailed report, including a named suspect, and handed it over to the Greek authorities. It was a turning point. The authorities moved, and a trial date was eventually set. A family that had been fighting for 17 years finally had their day in court. The 4-day trial took place at the Lasithi Law Courts in Neapoli, Crete. The prosecution's case centered on a man who had been in a brief relationship with Jean at the start of 2009. When Jean ended the relationship, the prosecution argued, he refused to accept it. He began stalking her, turning up at her home and her workplace, asking for money and following her. Jean's eldest son Robert told the court his mother had kept a diary in which the accused was named, describing what he called a steady relationship that Jean had tried to end in a polite way, only to be bullied and pursued. Her middle son Michael said the diary made clear that Jean was trying to end all communication with the man. Robert described the diary as his mother's voice. The trial heard expert evidence from forensic pathologist Elena Crantoni, who became involved in the case in 2019. Crantoni reviewed post-mortem examination reports and photographic evidence and told the court that Jean had died from an incomplete tear of the brainstem. She said the fatal injury was likely caused by a forceful blow to the back of the neck with a blunt object. The injuries, she said, were not consistent with a fall. She also told the court that she believed Jean had been placed in the sea rather than thrown in, and that she would have been alive when she entered the water. Jean's 3 sons had traveled from Dumfries to Crete to attend the trial and give evidence. Their testimonies about their mother's diary, her own words, written in her own hand, formed a central part of the prosecution's case. Robert described the diary as important evidence that had not received sufficient attention in the years since his mother's death. Michael said that reading his mother's words, seeing her trying to free herself from a man who would not let her go, brought everything into painful focus. After 4 days of evidence, the jury, consisting of both members of the public and judges under the Greek system, returned their verdict. Guilty. The 54-year-old defendant was convicted of the murder of Jean Hanlon and sentenced to 10 years in prison. There was no physical evidence directly connecting the two on the night of Jean's death, but the jury found the prosecution's case proven beyond reasonable doubt. 17 years after Jean Hanlon's body was found in the water off Heraklion, a court had finally delivered justice. The court recognized diminished responsibility in the case due to the defendant's mental health conditions. The trial heard he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and was on daily medication. His sister told the court he would become aggressive if he did not take his medication. The prosecution argued he had not been taking his medication during his relationship with Jean. As a result of the diminished responsibility finding, the defendant will not go to prison until his appeal has been heard, a source of significant frustration for Jean's family. Outside the court, Michael Porter spoke about what the verdict meant for his family. His words were quiet, measured, and profound. "It's really hard to put into words, and it still hasn't really quite sunk in. 17 years has been such a long time, but it feels like yesterday." He described what it meant to finally have his mother's voice heard in a room full of strangers, people who did not know Jean Hanlon, but who listened to her story and believed it. For the first time in a very, very long time, in a room full of strangers, Mum's voice was heard, he said. "And that is remarkable for us as individuals, as a family, and for Mum." And then, with the simplicity that only grief can produce, he said what every member of his family had waited 17 years to say: "Mum can finally be free." Jean Hanlon was 53 years old when she was murdered in Crete. She kept a diary. She tried to end a relationship politely. She was stalked and pursued by a man who would not accept her decision. Greek authorities ruled her death accidental. Her family never stopped fighting. And 17 years later, through grief, through a private investigator, through a 4-day trial in a foreign country, they heard a verdict that gave their mother's voice the weight it always deserved. Mum can finally be free. Rest in peace, Jean Hanlon. If you found this report informative, please subscribe so you don't miss our next update.